So, hello, John. Welcome to my podcast, One for the Road. We originally met a few weeks ago on a Nakoa live, and hearing your story was so powerful for me. And I really resonated with a lot of what you said because we come from a similar era. Um, so, I thought it'd be a really, really good thing for you to come on today. So, thank you for agreeing to record this with me today. How are you, mate?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks, Dave, and thanks for inviting me. And congratulations on all your work as well. So yeah, I'm good. I'm excited. I've done a few of these, but yeah, thanks for having me, Dave.
Thank you, mate. And it's nice to have someone on with a similar kind of accent.
Cockney podcast, yeah.
Yeah, the Cockney podcast. But I'm actually not Cockney. You are. But I come from Croydon, as most people know. But yeah, I get related to like a good old Croydon Barra boy half the time. But do you know what? When this goes out in the States, people kind of like it, the old accent. So it goes down well. Um, but like listening to your story is really powerful, John. And you know, growing up as a child of a alcoholic is a really, really important subject to cover. So it'd be really good if you feel comfortable to wind it back to what it was like growing up for you and your first memories.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny when it was only when I started writing the book that I realised it was actually a love story, the book, to my mum, because my first actual memories, Dave, was, how much I loved my mum. Just like, this son mother relationship. She was beautiful, like, just absolutely adored her. Um, in fact, the first chapter of the book is called The Special One, because she
Mm.
always called me the special one. And as a kid, I was very, very intelligent, but like really. And there was a Leo Sayer song. It was the biggest song of the 70s, When I Need You. And I used to um, memorize that and sing it to my mum every night um, before she used to go to bed, before I used to go to bed. So it was this sort of love story. And then I would say, and then, like I say in the book, at the age of 8, I I didn't really know. I knew my dad was like had a reputation. Well, he was one of the hardest men in the West End, so I knew he had violence in him. Um, and I knew my mum. She probably had a drink problem, but I wasn't aware. And then I come home from school one day, um, and my mum was lying in bed, beaten up badly by my dad. And they call it like it was like an incited incident, Dave. Like in a film or a book, they call it an inciting incident, and it was the inciting incident. And it was only years and years later, when I got sober and I was having therapy, that I actually shut down, from emotionally at 8 years old. Coming, it was actually around this, because I'm a big Arsenal fan. It was actually the same time as the 1978 FA Cup final. It was Arsenal Ipswich. I was all excited. I come home from school and my mum was lying in bed beat up. So, and I would say I've worked with adult children of alcoholics, all my life. I've been a like counsellor and families counsellor for 16 years. It's so powerful when you're growing up in a sort of family of an alcoholic, um, that I'm probably this part of me that's still shut down from that incident. I can go back there. So just to give you an example, you know, someone could I could feel fear. I could walk out in the street and someone could shout at me, and I could go fear, and I'd go straight back to that bedroom where
Yeah.
I'm looking at my mum, even today. It's almost like a form of PTSD, if you like. So that's what it was about. And then after that, it it was almost like the cat was out of the bag, and the violence got worse, the abuse got worse, the trauma got worse, and that's kind of like how the story started. you know, from the age of 8. So yeah, and it was like, looking at it, Dave, it's like you become an 8-year-old in this sort of navigating this war zone, you know. So you're 8-year-old, you got to keep everyone sweet as well, like everyone happy, you know. I've got to hide my mum's drinking. I've
Yeah.
got to protect her from my dad. And also, you know, so I'm 8 years old trying to run the house, trying to, you know, navigate it, you know. So I'd come home from school, my mum would be drunk, and I'd be trying to sober her up
Oh,
before my
bless you,
dad
mate.
get home.
Yeah.
You know, trying to. I remember once saying, "Oh, look, I'll make dinner. You go and have a lie down. You know, you sober up, please." You know, and these memories, I'd forgot about all of this, and obviously it brought it all up, Dave. And this is at 8 or 9. You know,
Yeah.
but the bottom line is, I could never get my mum sober. You know, and I kind of like failed. You know, so I had all them sort of them feelings of failure, and also as a young boy, you know, the feelings of being the special one. Well, I wasn't the special one anymore. And so I become sort of feeling unlovable. You know, if my mum chose drink over me, what does that make me?
Yeah.
So that's kind of like the beginning of the story, Dave.
You had to grow up really early, didn't you? You know, like, and it probably started before that as well. You were aware of it, but at 8 years old, what happened to your mum then? You then stepped up, didn't you, and thought, right, I need to protect my mum because you loved her so much. And at 8 years old, that's a
Mm.
real big responsibility, isn't it? And you know what you say about I couldn't make her sober up. You know, it's down to your mum for a start. That, you know, like, I can really feel the sense of failure you felt then.
Yeah, I mean, look, this is one thing about addiction, and the families. The hardest thing for families to come in, to come into my service, and I say to them, look, in someone in addiction, no one can stop someone in addiction. It's got to come from them. You know, I use the analogy. You know, there's 7 billion people in the world, and 7 billion people can't stop someone using and drinking. It's got to come from them, and it's probably directly or indirectly why I went into. You know, I trained as an addictions counsellor, but I specialised in families straight away because I I probably realised at the age of 10 when we was taken away from my mum that I couldn't stop her. You know, I tried everything, um, and and then even when, I mean, I think we had 27 years of not living with her, and she still drank. She actually, you know, God bless her, you know, she drank herself to death in the end. You know, she had alcoholism on her death certificate.
Really?
Yeah, so due to combustion or multiple organ failure, as normally happens. I mean, with alcoholism, they always say, you know, people say cirrhosis of the liver is,
Yeah.
you know, actually it's not, because if alcoholics get to cirrhosis of the liver, they've actually done well, because normally it's another organ that kills them beforehand, you know.
Mm,
Because we know with alcoholism it goes through like multiple organs,
yeah.
and normally it's multiple organ failure that kills them, and that's what happened to my mum. Yeah.
Yeah. My son's stepdad died. He fell and hit his head and bled out, but when they did an autopsy, his esophagus had exploded as well. So they didn't know what came first. But people don't realize, you know, the amount of effects that alcohol has on their organs. It goes for all of them. There's a video I share with my clients that it starts from when it goes in through the lips, you know, and the journey it travels down the body and through the organs, that the damage is collateral damage, you know, and it's scary. And this is why I try and educate people about that. Because when I was drinking, I was like, "Oh, I've got a pain in my side. Is that my liver? Is that it for me?" And that's the story we tell each other, isn't it?
Oh, without a doubt. I remember going on alcohol training years ago, and I know it goes through the why the liver gets it. It goes through the liver twice. It
Mm,
goes through it once and then comes through it again. Also, the brain as well. I
yeah,
mean, people alcoholism for me is, my family of origin, Dave. I mean, I talk about, a lot in the sort of book, about my family of origin. And my family of origin, my mum and dad's side, is either Korsakoff's, which is wet brain syndrome,
yeah,
dementia through alcoholism. I went up to at the end of my drinking, I was really unwell. I was mentally, I was on the edge of a mental breakdown. I was having panic attacks. I was really bad, and I went up to the Royal Free Hospital in London. And my uncle, I went up there with my dad. My uncle was in there with Korsakoff's, wet brain syndrome, and I remember, this is how bad it is. The doctor had said it. My uncle had fallen off his bed and had really damaged himself. We think he's broke his ribs, but we're not sure because he can't tell us. So
yeah.
we can't give him painkillers. And I remember cornering this doctor because I knew that there was something wrong, and cornering him, getting him to explain what Korsakoff's, what people can drink themselves, and he was looking at me thinking, and I now realise that, that's what was happening to me, if you like, my
Mm,
cognitive mental state. So, I think I think now, with like the work you doing, people are realizing that you don't have to go that far with this alcoholism.
mm.
My story is either family members, hanging themselves, killing themselves, prostitution, Korsakoffs, losing families. That is my family of origin. And it's kind of like why I do believe I've been given a gift from somewhere, Dave, getting sober, that
Mm.
it's just to tell the story, like you said,
Yeah,
tell this story of what. And also, Dave, alcoholism, we know that whatever figures you read in the UK, alcoholism kills 10 to 15 times more as a drug than all the other illicit drugs put together.
yeah, I know.
You know,
It's
um,
crazy. And I often talk about that, the way it's glamorized in society. And it's hard, like the mantra we're meant to say now we're sober and now we're trying to do the work we're doing is I'm not anti-alcohol, but blah, 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 blah. It's really hard to say that when you get messages coming into your email box and DMs saying, my husband died Friday, age 38, and he's left 3 children. Um, like it's hard not to actually hate it, to be fair. But John, I really feel I want to hear um, how it was for you growing up, seeing a woman that you love so much go through her own journey of alcoholism. How did that make you feel, mate?
it's a really, really good question. I mean, I just incredible sadness that, the title of the book, like Alcohol Stole My Mum,
It's
just
really
this,
powerful, that mate. That's a powerful title. Says it all.
yeah, yeah, just real sadness. Like this woman that I know was a beautiful, beautiful woman. I remember my dad, who was, God bless him, quite an angry man. And I remember he used to say about my mum that she would never say a bad word about anyone.
Mm,
She really had this sort of, and it was really sad. you know, as the drink come, and, you know, with drink, resentments and anger, used to see the resentments and anger, and and just real sadness that what alcohol done to this beautiful woman, you know,
Mm.
and how, you know, I was sort of like robbed, you
Yeah.
know, of this sort of this relationship and what
Yeah.
it done. And also the sort of, I mean, my book is about generational, like, addiction, you know, what she was given, alcoholism, you know. And this is why, you know, there's sort of my opinion, you know, alcoholism is a mental illness, because, you know, all and people get, you know, people have got their opinions, you know, that you're not of sound, you know, it's about insanity, you're not of sound mind. I mean, the thing that traumatized me up the most as a little boy, alcohol, the thing that I used to help to fix me, that helped with my trauma, was the same thing that traumatized me up.
Yeah.
This is why it's so evil. My mum, her dad was an alcoholic,
Yeah.
you know, witness. She used the same thing, the generational, like, thing
Handed
of
down through.
alcoholism. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. Um,
But do you know what, John? It's interesting that you say that, because um, it's almost like learned behavior as well. Like, I believe it's a mental illness, and I believe there's a genetic link. Um, but I also believe that you're not just given that gene, you know, it's can skip, but learn behavior. And also, it was a coping strategy for you to deal with your feelings, because when you had those feelings from such a young age, it's like, how are you meant to deal with them if you don't understand them, you know? And also, I mean, how old were you when you started to drink?
I was 15.
Oh,
I was 15. And you know, whatever, like, there's all different opinions. I think the thing we will, everyone's got to agree, this coping mechanism and this escapism, you
yeah,
know, this, you know, you don't, escapism driven by low self-esteem, which is interesting, because it's only when I've worked, you know, with sort of people in recovery who have got clean and sober, they will recognize, or they will admit, you know, it was low self-esteem. I mean, you don't set about trying to destroy yourself with addiction if you like yourself. You
yeah,
know, I think that the low self-esteem and the escapism. And when I first picked up, I had all this stuff, like, you know, all this trauma, you know, all going on, still trying to hide my mum's alcoholism. Like, we lived in London, she lived in Scotland. She was just enough away, far enough away. When people would ask about my mum, because especially in the 80s, it was very, very unusual. It probably still is, that why is John living with his dad? Where's his mum? So I kind of like stuck out like a sore thumb. And then when people would ask about my mum, I'd change the subject, you know, you know, so I had that shame. It was almost the thing, Dave, of, you know, didn't you? You know that my mum. So I had all that shame. I had all that trauma from childhood that was buried. So when I picked up a drink at 15, you know, you talk about escapism and all that coping, self-medication.
yeah,
When I picked up a drink at 15, it took all of that away.
yeah.
It was beautiful, and it leveled up the playing field. I
Mm.
was actually okay. Um, I was quite. I used humour a lot, so all of a sudden, I was like a centre of attention down
Yeah,
the pub, the
yeah.
Joker. You know,
Accepted as well. You
yeah,
you you fitted somewhere.
exactly.
Yeah,
Fitted, you know, big football fan as well. Went to football, you know. Then I started working, and then I could go in pubs. So it was like that, you know, natural, like, progression. And the interesting thing is, you know, I made sure that I would never be like my mum, because I always worked. you know, I trained. I used to. I always say this. I became like really fit physically, so I used to run marathons, Dave. And I used to say the reason I used to run marathons was to prove I wasn't an alcoholic. You know,
Mm.
that sort of like, well, I can't have a drink problem. I'm going on 10, 15-mile runs.
Yeah.
You know, that sort of justification. And what happened to me, Dave, was that I never lost anything like materialistically because I never missed a day's work. You know, I had a young family, I had the 2 cars, I had the house, I had all of this, I had the money. But what I done was I lost my mind. You know, the alcoholism took my mind away, and I do believe that was the only thing that would have stopped me drinking. You know, and and having my 2 young girls as well, because my girls were 2 and 3, and I remember looking at them and thinking, I don't want to give them what was given me. And
Yeah.
in a way, just skipping back about my mum, I used my mum as a sort of like, I used her to say, look, mum, you know, I actually, when I was in treatment, Dave, I wrote her a letter, you know, telling her that I was in recovery now and, you know, I understand what you went through. But I used my mum as a motivation.
Yeah.
I didn't want to pass this down to my girls, you know. So yeah, and I used alcohol for 18 years, and like they say with the illness of addiction, Dave, it got worse and worse and worse. I mean,
Yeah, it's progressive, isn't it? So you don't
yeah,
start off with a liter of vodka, you know, it's progressive. And this is why I get fascinated by exploring how we go with it. You know, we start off at young, you know what you say about 15 and you being accepted. It's like you're telling my story because
mm,
my mum left at 14, you know, and I was living with my dad, and my dad was struggling because he all of a sudden had to do the dinners and go to work and try and do the washing and the iron and all that. And I become extremely practical around things. I would turn my own trousers up at 14 and try and sew the bottoms and, you know, do the ironing and wash up and do all the household chores to try and take it off my dad's shoulders, you know. Um,
mm,
but I know that in later life that put me in good stead for a lot of
yeah.
things, you know, because I become resilient. But I'm really interested, John. Again, going back a little bit. How did your mum come to live in Scotland then, and you come to live with your dad, especially as he was like violent towards your mum?
So what happened was my mum and dad were both actually Scottish, and they met out in. Well, actually, my mum um, were both Scottish. My dad come down to London when he was 8, to the West End, but my mum and dad actually in the 60s were £10 poms. So they went over to Australia, and paid you £10 and went over there and worked and met over there. And we come back um, to live in London. I was actually born in Australia, funny enough.
Oh, wow.
Come back. So in the story, Dave, we come back, we live in London. Um, it starts off, you know, all the violence. So what they do is which is a great thing of an alcoholic to do. They decide we'll have a new start. So we go back to Australia, you know, called a geographical. You know, you take the only problem is with an alcoholic, you know, you might go to another place, but you take your head with you.
Yeah,
So my mum's alcoholism was taken to Australia.
yeah,
So in the book, it gets really bad over there. My dad leaves. So my mum, it gets really dark in Australia. My mum, we come back with my mum and me and my little sister, and we go and live in Scotland. And I mean, it gets really bad in Scotland because whatever you said about my dad, he was a protective factor with the kids.
mm,
He wasn't a protective factor with my mum. Um, but so there was no protective factor now. So we went to Scotland, Dave, and we were living. So there was 2 kids. So I was 8 or 9. My sister was 4 or 5. We're living in a house with 3 alcoholics, with my mum, her brother, my Uncle James, and a wonderful man called Whiskey Ben, my granddad.
Yeah.
So you can imagine. And that's where I was, I think the reading you heard, I mean, literally, there was just men everywhere. The place stunk of like urine, piss everywhere. I was talking yesterday, Dave. It was really good how you was talking about like anchors, like in your life. So anchors for me were like football at 3 o'clock. You know, in them days, all football matches. So it was either watching Arsenal, watching Celtic, Top of the Pops a bit later on Thursday night, and then
Yes, 7 o'clock.
yeah. And then what we were talking about, which was hilarious, was Noel Edmonds Swap Shop, Saturday morning.
Yeah, I used to love that.
Yeah, and it was funny how you identified, because it was just too manic for me. And it was later on, you know, when everyone was getting into the young ones,
Yeah.
I couldn't. I thought, I don't like this, because the thing is, the young ones was really violent. They were going around. I thought, that's like my house, you know.
Yeah. Started off with Vivian putting a leg on the bonnet of an Anglia. But I can really relate to that, because there's triggers, isn't it? There's trigger points, and that represents chaos to you.
100%. Yeah. I mean, violence. I mean, I just this sort of thing of, you know, I used to go around like mate's house and I remember in Australia, I tell in the book, I went round a friend's of mine house and they were having a barbecue, and the mum and dad were like having a bit of banter. And I remember looking at them thinking, they were joking. And I remember they give each other a big hug and they were kissing. It was a bit, and I thought, that's strange. You know, a mum and dad showing love to each other. That's really strange, because that wasn't my experience, you know. So it got really bad in Scotland. And what happened was, you know, you say about this over responsibility. I actually wrote my dad a letter at 10, because what had happened, I mean, I'm not going to go in, it got really dark. My mum got involved with a man up there. You know, you know, it's in the book. It got really, really dark. You know, the kids. I mean, if social service, I mean, you could do a case study with social services, what was going on. You know, it was really, really bad. So I actually, as 10, Dave, wrote my dad a letter and said, "Look, Dad, you know, we don't feel that safe. Mum's drinking. If you don't come and pick us up and get us, I'm going to kill myself." Wow. You know, it was that bad, because what had happened was, it was the summer holidays, Dave, and I'd gone down and spent a week with my dad and my auntie, and it was really nice, you know. So it was like almost like safe, you know, lovely time. We'd gone down to Dymchurch down on the south coast.
And he was your protector as well. So there was a level of safety there that you felt. And probably,
I mean, he was.
Yeah, with your mum as well. There's a level of not feeling protected if she was drinking all the time as well at your age.
Yeah, definitely. So I'd wrote him a letter when I was 10 to say, you know, and to be fair to my dad, he did come up and get us, you know, and we come back to London with nothing. And this was the confusion with both my parents. Obviously, my mum, I loved her at Beaches, and I had, you know, she calls me great harm, but I loved her. My dad, he actually brought us up on his own, you know. Yeah. He actually brought us up and he'd done this job on his own, but I had all this stuff that no one knew about that I witnessed him do. So I loved my dad, you know. because he did. He looked after us. He gave us all this, but I also had all the secrets, Dave, of what he'd done to my mum, and I was the only one who knew. And I suppose that's why I wanted to write the book, was to no one else knew. I mean, my dad, you know, it's like someone you probably get it because I know you got a lot of followers. Someone wrote me a thing on Instagram saying, "Oh, this book, the woman always gets blamed, blah blah blah." And I said, "This is not blaming anyone. This is just telling a story. I'm not. My mum and dad were both quite unwell people at times. If you read the book, this is not. I'm not blaming anyone. This is just what happened to me as a boy,
Yeah.
and I think that's the strength of the book, Dave. There's no blame.
No.
Um,
And I
you
can
know,
hear by how you're explaining it, you have compassion for both of them.
yeah, yeah.
And that's what's so lovely about you, John. You know, there's no judgment there. And even at the beginning, when you started talking about how your dad treated your mum, and you said, "Oh, my dad, bless him," and I thought, "Oh, that's lovely." You know, you kind of accept them individually for the good, you know. And now you're saying he brought you up independently from the age of 10 is amazing. But also for you at that age to hold all that baggage, you know, like
Mm.
from the from a young age, you're holding all this trauma and baggage is a lot to manage.
No, 100%, Dave. And this is why I do believe, that someone's whatever anyone's belief in, whether I've been given a gift or someone's looking out for me, you know, to go through all this like childhood trauma, then to go, with my own addiction and my own mental health issues and where I came and to get out of it, reasonably sane most of the time and be able to tell a story that, someone must be looking out for me. I really have got this thing, Dave, that,
Yeah,
some, if you like, it's whether you believe in God or whatever, but it's almost like someone said to me, look, I'm going to give you all this trauma as a boy. You're going to go through all your addiction. You're going to come, but this has been given to you because you're going to then come out the
yeah,
other end and write a book and tell a story,
yeah.
and you're going to help other people.
Yeah,
And
I relate to that. And I, you know, like I've mentioned in my book about my mum and the relationship I had with her when she left, you know, and at 14 years old to open a letter and not even have a hug from your mum explaining the reason why was tough for me. But when she died a couple of weeks later, and it wasn't even a dream, it was like a vision, like a semi-conscious thing in the night that I met her again. And it wasn't long after that that I stopped. And I feel her around me all the time. And I believe, as you say, whether you believe it or not, that I've been given this gift as well. And that's said without arrogance, like you are. It's a blessing in a way that I've had this experience in my life, and it's like what we do with it is powerful. And you know, even in the last half an hour you speaking, I can see the gift you have, mate. Like it's so powerful, and you should be proud of yourself, mate. I do want to ask you as well, when you came down from Scotland, when your dad picked you up, how did your mum react to that?
yeah, I mean, it's another good question. Do you know what? It probably nothing. She was so she was so far gone, with the drinking, Dave, that she didn't react. She never, because I think the only thing that she could have done, if she wanted her kids back, was to try and get sober.
Yeah,
But she never did. We used to go up and see her holidays. So whenever Christmas, Easter, summer, to give my dad a break. I mean, you know, and I'm not blaming anyone, but you know, would I send my kids up to the summer holidays, you know, to my alcoholic, you know? But that's just the way it was. And it was like the times going up there. You know, you talk about growing up. So say we used to go up for the summer holidays, yeah. My dad would give me, I don't know how much it was, maybe for the 6 week shopping money. I can't even remember, 100 quid. I don't know how much it was in the 80s, 50 quid, 100 quid. My instructions were, you do not give that to your mum, you know, you do the shopping. You know,
Yeah.
so I'm 11 or 12 years old. You do, and I'm laughing about it now because it's and my mum would know that I had the shopping, the money. You
Yeah.
know, there was also another story, Dave, that we used to, and I talk about it in the book. So we used to get the coach up from Victoria to Buchanan Street in Glasgow, and as it was coming in to the bus station, I'd be looking out the window because I knew she'd be there just to see if she was pissed or not.
Yeah.
You know, and the real like, oh, and then what we'd have to do if she was pissed, I'd have to get a cab because we'd get a bus, and the cab would maybe take a week's because the cab was quite a lot because you had to go boundary charges. You know, the cab. Say the bus was £1, the cab would be a tenner. I don't know, you know, whatever it was. And but it would be better to be in a cab, her maintained in a cab, than be on this bus, you know, drunk and just
Yeah.
shaming me up, you know. So unfortunately, you know, nothing changed. And just one point I just want to make there, which kind of I think kind of like ties into what you say, Dave. So my mum got taken away. We got taken away from my mum when I was 10. She died when I was 37. So 27 years, yeah, of still having my mum like shaming us and all that. And I said to my sister, right, which is a horrible thing to say, and it's a question I ask and ask clients. I said, what would have been better? Would it have been better if mum would have died when we was 10? Or would it have been better that she had another 27 years of shaming us? It's a horrible, but my sister said it'd have been better if she'd have died then, because then
Yeah.
at least we could have grieved. Now, I asked that to my clients, and most of them say it'd be better, you know, if they'd have gone to put us out of our misery, but to be put her out of her misery. And that's what addiction does. It,
Yeah.
you know, that's so. And what a, you know, you talk about alcoholism, the most evil, unnatural. What a question to ask.
Mm.
But it just stopped that 27 years of trauma of carrying on with it. You know.
It's such a powerful question, mate. And you know, I talk to Sarah Drage a lot. She's amazing, and she quite often feels the guilt of thinking she wishes her dad was dead. You know, right? Because you're put through the misery of it, aren't you? And
Yeah.
on paper, your parents are away with the fairies, carrying on doing what they're doing, blasé, right? But for you, like from a very, very early age, you've had to live with this terrible addictive substance. But it's the knock-on effects that I talk about to people. You know, quite often when I work with my clients, I ask how old their kids are. You know, I go for the jugular as well. I don't muck about like you with that question. You know, I say, how old are they? Are you aware of the potential damage this is causing already? That the mummy wine o'clock culture in front of them. It's like, oh, mummy's a bit anxious. She's having the magic juice or the, you know, the wine, and like from a young age. And it's people, some people don't react kindly to it, but I don't care in a way because it needs to be said. It's, you know, like hearing your story, just and saying like, I wish we didn't have to experience that 27 years, because what was that experience? What quality of relationship did you have? It prolonged the misery in a way, then added to it the older you got, especially if you were drinking as well. It's a double-edged sword as well, isn't it?
Yeah. And the thing is, you know, just leading on from that, I remember in the midst of my, you know, breakdown. It's funny, when I come in 2003, there was still this thing about men talking about breakdowns. You know, I had a breakdown. I'd lost my mind. You know, I drunk myself insane. I was in a nut house, a posh nut house, Dave, but it was still a nut house. And there was either two. I was either going to kill myself because I didn't want to give my girls what was given me. They didn't deserve it. And luckily, I was in a place that was offering me recovery. You know, there was no, I am happy I was so unwell, because there was either two choices, you know, with this sort of, if you're, you know, if you got to a place like me, if you had a family of origin like me with the alcoholism, it's either black or white, you know, it's either, you know, top yourself or recover it or carry on drinking. I couldn't drink anymore. It was either top yourself, what was going on in my head, or recovery. There was no black and white, you know, and I only had to look at my family of origin, you know. My evidence was there.
The
You
buck
know.
stops here with you is what
Yeah.
you did. It's like I've got draw a line in the sand with it. And I just want to add to that as well. I mentioned about kids growing up with the mum and the wine o'clock. It's not women as well, it's men. And what you've done there is you've drawn a line in the sand through your experiences and knowledge about it as well. So, when did you stop drinking, John?
2003, 17th of October, 2003.
That's
That was my
fantastic,
last day.
mate.
Yeah.
19
Thank you.
years.
Yeah, not celebrated 19 years in October, one day at a time. Yeah.
Well
Yeah.
done, mate. That's
Thank you.
fantastic.
Thank you. Yeah. And the great thing is, Dave, my girls are now 21 and 22. My eldest daughter, she won't read the book because she thinks it'd make her too sad. But my youngest daughter, she read it and she sent me. The great NACOA, who we're both involved with, the National Association of Children of Alcoholics, I put something on their website, you know, features, and at the end, I wrote the letter or the email my daughter sent me. You know, just blows my mind. And this sort of thing, that's all I needed. You know, I'm so proud of you, Dad. And
Yeah.
you know, when your daughter says, "I'm so proud," I didn't realise this, and
Yeah.
and do you know something? Since I've written the book. Excuse me. It's really interesting. I've always been really close to my daughters, but I've noticed another level of things they're sharing with me.
Yeah.
You know, things that they maybe would go to their mother with, but I noticed they're bringing things to me now, and I'm just that little bit of depth that they're bringing to me now, which is really, really beautiful. It's priceless.
Yeah, but I think there, John, is because you are more open to the universe. You've opened the doors and go like, come in. You know, you're attracting that. I don't want to go into the law of attraction, but what I find with me is that when I was drinking, I was looking down at the floor with blinkers on. I would only see what I wanted to see. I would only let in what I wanted to let in because of the shame and the lack of self-worth and that.
Yeah.
And when I stopped drinking, I started to look within myself and I started to accept myself. Difficult in the beginning because I didn't know who I was. You know, it's like a snake shedding its skin. You have to start again. You know, I use the analogy of being in prison. I drank for 40 years, right? So after 40 years, I was let free and I've walked out and everything's different. I didn't recognize anything and I didn't know how I would fit in society because I was no longer that, like you say, I'd make people laugh with the banter down the pub with the football. I'd be at the doors of the pub on a Sunday at midday and the landlord unbolt the door. Oh, hello, Glugs in, you walk in. Like a son. Yeah, knowing I was in for the whole session, all of a sudden, I've taken myself out of that environment and I was like, who the hell am I? And I had to start to shape my life again, John. And what happened there was I become so much more open to so many more things, you know. So I can really relate, like your daughters, I can just feel how very proud they are of you. But hearing your backstory as well, they haven't had to experience that as well, which is a gift because you did draw the line in the sand with the story of your generations. You've gone, no, I'm not doing this to my daughters, to me, to my family. I'm stopping it here. And that is the power of sobriety. You know, it's not all just about, oh, look at my skin glowing in the mirror and oh yeah, it's all great. The knock-on effect to everyone is huge, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, we call it excuse me, stopping the cycle.
Yeah.
You know, I took responsibility, you know, that responsibility, the buck stops with me. And it's really interesting. I was just thinking, Dave, when you said like that early recovery, you know, it's like things change. You notice the leaves on the trees and the
Yeah.
grass, but also the thing that I remember is the feelings that coming up. I remember sitting in rehab. I actually in rehab, you know, I got taken the piss by some of my peers, but they actually went out and drank again. But because all I'd done in rehab for the first week I was in rehab, I wasn't an alcoholic, yeah, because I didn't want to say that words. I didn't want to be like my mum. I didn't want to be, you know, shameful like my mum, you know. And after a week, I I finally admitted I was an alcoholic. You know, it was almost like, you know, the denial had been broken, and it was like, wow, the drink is the problem here. The drink is the problem. And when that came out, I actually just cried for the next 2 weeks in rehab, just, you know, crying like a baby, and probably crying like that 8-year old. You know, you were saying about the, you know, the trauma, just
Yeah.
carrying all that back, just, you know, letting it go, letting it go.
Yeah.
And then feelings, you know, that there's a great saying. I love this saying. You know, in recovery, they say that, you know, the good thing about recovery is you get your feelings back. The bad thing about recovery is you get your feelings back.
Yeah.
I just love that saying, you know,
Yeah.
because they're painful at the beginning, because normally it's, oh, there's a feeling coming on. I'll have a drink. I'll have a joint. I'll have this, you know. But no, it's about sitting with the feelings, you know.
Yeah. It's powerful, mate. And I found as well, when I stopped drinking, I reverted back to the 14-year-old standing there reading the letter because I hadn't developed emotionally from then. I really
Yeah,
hadn't. I got into this gang and they were really, really macho, you know, um, which I'd steered away from before that. I was a bit, not a mummy's boy, but I was sensitive and I didn't like violence and I didn't like, you know, fighting other schools and that. I was the joke teller and come on, the
yeah,
peacemaker in a way. And when mum left and that, I kind of heard towards this group because they took me in and I felt accepted. Right. And that's what gave me my sort of self worth then, because I thought, oh, I'm part of something here. And I've written in my book about becoming the character in this group. I wasn't the fighter, I was the drinker, you know, a bit like the usual suspects with Mr. Pink, Mr. Black, and whatever. You know, I
yeah,
was the drinker. And so I never used to really have to get involved in all the fighting and that. But when I stopped drinking, all of a sudden I was like, feeling the feelings of that 14-year-old, you know. And sometimes I do a post with a picture of me as a kid, and it's so hard to move on. I've had a lot of therapy, like you probably, John, that to try and unpick it and try and understand that it wasn't my fault, the rejection. You know, it wasn't because I was a bad son or unlovable. It was more a circumstance of the addiction. And you know, I mean, I say that I was talking about your side. For me, my mum and dad didn't really drink, but my mum met someone else, so she's gone off, and I felt the rejection there. You
Yeah,
know,
the abandonment. Yeah,
but for you, your mum, it's like she met someone else, which was alcohol. So
yeah,
she's got her relationship she's left you for, and that's why the title's so good. Alcohol stole my mum. Is you've nailed it there, you know.
mm,
Um,
yeah.
but it's how we feel about it. And I mean, you must have a lot of children of alcoholics approach you for support. Is how do you help them? By telling your story, or how do you guide them? Because I talk to them, and like I only talk as the alcoholic or the addict, or however you want to frame it. But how do you help them?
Well, it's interesting because all my clients are like obviously families of alcoholics and addicts, and the majority of them, I think, you know, the majority of them have have carried this role since they were like young. If you look at it, so on our assessment, it will say, "Did you grow up in an alcoholic home?" And probably, I don't know the number, maybe 80% will say yes. So they've carried this role, Dave, you know, of fixer, of rescuer.
Yeah,
And we know that, you know, statistics, I think the last, you know, years ago, I think they say 80% of people who end up in addiction grew up in an alcoholic home, but then the other 20% might be, they call it the toxic trio: alcoholism, domestic violence, and mental health. You know, so the way I work with them is to actually, you know, try and, you know, like you say, this wasn't your fault, you know, but it's hard if you're, and it's acknowledging this to my clients when I come in. It's hard for, you know, you've had this role for 40 years, you
yeah,
know, you've had this sort of role for a long, long time. Just like when, if you like, the first part of my career was an addictions counsellor. You've had this role of being an alcoholic for, well, I think you used the 40 years, and now you've got to try something else. I mean, that is hard. That's why we know, and I say this to family members, and like what you say, I like that analogy for the jugular. The statistics of people getting clean and sober are tiny.
yeah,
You know, people don't understand the power of addiction and alcoholism. You know, you're talking about, you know, the years in. So, for my example, I had 18 years of my own addiction, my own alcoholism, the trauma that, and then I had all the childhood trauma, and I've been using this medication called alcoholism for 18 years to help me with what had happened before. And you want me to stop?
yeah, yeah,
You're mad, and
yeah, yeah, yeah,
you want me to put down my medicine, leave
yeah,
off, you know. And these are why the numbers are so. I think the power, like, you know, I'm sure you'd agree, is just listening
mm,
and just like saying, do you know what? It's okay you feel like that. I mean, I've read a million counts, you know, done theories, obviously trained as a counsellor. You know, the best thing you can do, especially when you talk about addiction or families with addiction, is do the simple paraphrasing, do the simple normalizing people's feelings, and then you've built the relationship to explore, you know, what's going on. Because, you know, my belief is you can have all the programs, you know, in the world, and, you know, I've worked in lots of different treatment centers, you know, lots of, 12-step therapeutic communities, religious. I worked in a religious treatment center, and all these like programs are all good. But what's more important, Dave, is the relationship between the professional and the client. Because if I trust you, I am going to open up. I am going to really explore. So it's just that basic. I hear what you're saying. I really hear what you're saying, and that's okay.
That's so powerful, John. I'll give you a reason I understand that is that when I stopped drinking, right, I was invited along to a group circle, sharing circle, right, in Clapham, by this guy Chris, who was a genius, and he held these sessions, and they were people that I mean, my drinking was off the scale, but I had a warm roof over my head and a loving family and support around me, but I was still caning a liter of vodka a night, right? These people had lost their kids, were homeless, and they were going 10 minutes at a time without a drink, right? And I'm sitting in this circle and people were sharing, and I was like, Jesus, this is horrific. Like, real trauma going on there of, real, like, unbelievable stories. And at the end of the first session, I went up to Chris and I said, how do you manage all this? Like, what? And he said, I just listen. That people, that is the power of listening, and I learned that. I studied to be a counsellor for 2 years, right? And that was one of the biggest nuggets of gold that I learned from that is the listening abilities is huge to allow people to actually tell their story without any judgment, and to form that relationship of trust is so powerful. And that's with my work. I don't have any programs. It's bespoke to each individual, because I believe, right, that say you drank 2 bottles of wine a night and I drank 2 bottles, our relationship with those 2 bottles are quite potentially quite different, based on our background, our childhood, our environment, why you're using it as a coping tool and why I'm using it. And that's the thing. If you can sort of break it down and work with someone who trusts you, that's the power of success to me.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, I've like you, I've had a lot of personal like therapy. I remember I've had a couple of bad counsellors, and I remember going in for a session once, and I mean, at the end of the session, I was counselling her. But the reason I'm saying that, Dave, is I just didn't trust, from the beginning. And that especially like who I work with, families of alcoholics, it's always about the alcoholic, and the families don't get to a word. So when I come in, the tool I use with the families of alcoholics is say, look, I don't want to hear, because they'll come in and they'll want to talk a lot about their loved one, the alcoholic. And I say, look, I don't want to hear about them. I want to hear about you. How are you in all of this? And turn it around.
Yes.
And it's so powerful because, as I say, a lot of the times they want to come in. I'd say 80, 90% of my clients are mothers. They want to come in and fix their son, fix their daughter.
Yeah.
And I say, look, we can't fix them, but this is about you. And that's why I've got clients who have been coming for many, many years. It's that a lot of the time, because we know with active addiction, it's very live.
Yeah.
So this is just the space to actually express what's happening for you, what's going on for you.
I get that, mate. I was the husband of someone who had cancer 3 times, right? And no one ever really asked how I was. So I always remember that, how I felt and I didn't even feel like I could even talk about it. So I really think the power is right there, John. Like to ask the rescuer how they are, because they're in practical mode. They're in the mode of, I need to help them get over this. And they sacrifice all their feelings and put it on the back burner, right? But when you actually ask them, how are you? the tears come out. It's like, oh, I've never been asked that before.
Yeah.
Actually, I don't know how I am. I've not checked in with myself. And all of a sudden, it's like, God, there's some real stuff to work with there. And it's so
Yeah.
important as well.
Yeah. And also, you know, they'll say, well, if they stop drinking, I'll be okay. And I'll say, but what happens if they don't stop drinking? You know, really. And then that's like, and then that can get them in the feelings, because
Yeah.
it is, you know, you're almost like, you know, yourself, you know, whatever happens to them, it's that, you know, it's like how you're feeling is depending on how someone else is going to be acting.
Yeah.
And I'll bring it back down to, like, you know, the statistics. And I'm not here to scare anyone. I'm just saying the statistics of people getting clean and sober are not great. You know, alcoholism, alcoholic deaths, the first year of the pandemic were up by 20%. You know, alcoholic deaths are on the rise. You know, it ain't going anywhere, this stuff. You know, the numbers are terrible. So that's why it's important for my work to keep the focus on the families. How that simple question, Dave, how are you feeling?
Yeah.
How does that make you feel? You know, and I think you touched on, you know, I mean, we're great. So I work for an organisation called Turning Point in London, and I developed this family program. I mean, we run 3 family groups a week now. We know that isolation is one of the biggest characteristics for addiction or alcoholism, but also for families, and even more so for families, the shame of what the addiction has had in the families. You put a load of families of alcoholics and addicts in a room, and how they share with each other. I mean, they share with people who were strangers to them when they come in, things that they've never shared with to their family.
Yeah.
You know, because these people, there's no judgment, they identify with. But I do say to families of alcoholics, you know, it's brave. I'm asking you to come into a room with a load of people you've never met before and share with them the shameful family secrets that you've been holding for 20 years, you
Yeah.
know. But once they get in and they get that identification, you know, it's so powerful, Dave.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know.
I've witnessed that myself. You know, I've witnessed that. You know, one guy, he hadn't spoken to his daughter for 20 years because of his alcoholism, right? And we encouraged him to write a letter. And we said that even if you don't send it to her, write the letter and put it in a drawer, because for yourself, that's cathartic. You know, a bit like you writing your book, me writing mine. Like, there were times I was writing chapters, bawling my eyes out in there. Do you know what I mean? It's like bringing it all back up, but you have to explore that. You have to explore those feelings, be able to go through them and move on. And the power of your work is immense, John. And your book, you've sent me it. I'm so grateful. And I haven't had a chance to read it, but I'm going to. Before we finish, can you let everyone on this podcast listening know where they can find you, where they can buy your book? How can they reach out to you if they need support?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so the books, it's called Alcohol Stole My Mum. So you can get it on on our web page, on our which is alcoholstolemymum.co.uk. I'm on Instagram, Alcohol Stole My Mum, on Twitter as well. There's also an audio version of it, which it took 2 weeks to do. I mean, that just re-traumatized me, Dave.
Oh, do you know
Audio.
what, man? People keep asking if I'm going to do an audio as well. Um, yeah, I can see that. But look, the thing is, mate, I'm going to put all the details as well in the show notes. And when I share this podcast as well. So people need to know about you, John. I think the last hour has been really, really powerful. And I'm sure there'll be so many people that relate to your story and feel hope actually that they got somewhere to explore their feelings. And also like this cover and the COA, the amazing charity they are, that we both have involvement with. What a fantastic charity and organisation to reach out to as well, right?
Beautiful people. Yeah. I mean, Hillary, when I sent her the book, you know, she gave me a quote, which is on the book as well. Yeah. Just the work they do, you know, just where children can phone up, you know,
Yeah, free
Hillary,
helpline, isn't there?
beautiful work, you know, Hillary and Piers and,
Yeah, Josh.
really great. Josh, yeah, Josh and Laura and the rest of them. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, brilliant.
Are you doing a charity walk next year, aren't you?
Yeah, I see how I am actually. I see how my knee is, but yeah, I
Oh,
am. Are
mate,
you
I'm
doing
doing
it?
it
But
as well, so I'll give you a piggyback.
nah, yeah, I think yeah, no, I think I'll be doing it. I
Yeah.
can't really. I used to run marathons to prove I was an alcoholic, so surely I can do a walk to
Yeah,
help
we're do
recover.
it, mate. We're do it. I've got my
Definitely.
sweatshirt through the post as well, so I'm really looking forward to that, and I love what they do. You attended a charity football match yesterday with Callum Best was playing and Jermaine Defoe. That was at Bournemouth, right?
Yeah, yeah, it was great. It was great. It's the first time I've met Hillary, so because obviously you know with COVID and all that, so it was great. I had a lovely chat, big hug, Laura and a few of the other people who I've met on just on Zoom. So it was just lovely connecting
Yeah.
with them. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And
It was
Amy Dixon was there, and
Amy come up. Yeah,
yeah,
Amy. Yeah,
she's
yeah. So
been on my podcast as well, telling her story. So it's such
yeah, Amy
important
come up.
work. Yeah.
Yeah, I had to come up. I'm going to try and. I know you got your Christmas do it in my manner, Dave.
Yes, mate. Right where
Covent
you grew
Garden.
up.
Right when I grew up in the heart of it, mate. So I
Yeah.
might, yeah, I've seen it on the website, so I might pop down there, mate, and
Oh, it'd be
see you.
so lovely to see you, John. And again, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a really powerful hour for me as well, talking to you. So I'm so grateful, John. All the best for the future, mate, and good luck with the book. And I hope to see you soon.
Definitely. Thanks a lot, Dave. Have a great day, and thanks for the invite. Yeah. Cheers, mate.
Pleasure, mate. Take it easy.